a particular kind of quiet that falls over a room full of people who all know they are watching you be humiliated and have decided together to say nothing. I felt that quiet settle over the conference room at Miller and Associates on the morning of my wedding day. The moment my boss put his hand lightly on my shoulder, steered me away from the long mahogany table, where the senior partners were being seated, and pointed me toward a folding card table near the break room, a paper tablecloth, plastic cups. The junior staff already halfway through their coffee. "You will be more comfortable back here, Daniel," Richard said, and he smiled. The warm public smile he saved for moments when other people were watching. "Real staff sits up front, you understand?" I was 28 years old. I had just helped launch the firm's biggest project of the year, and I was being sat at the kids' table in the company my father had built with his own hands on the day I was supposed to be a senior partner. I did not make a scene. I never made a scene. That was the whole problem. And it had been the whole problem for 4 years. I sat down my portfolio at the little table, and I smiled back at my coworker, and I told myself the same thing I had told myself my entire life. Do not ruin it. Do not be the difficult one. Let it go. My name is Daniel Miller. Everyone who ever actually loved me called me Danny. And by that morning, there was exactly one person left alive at the firm who did. This is the story of the boss who spent 4 years treating me like a guest in my own life. The father who was too gentle to stop them while he was living. And the single sentence a lawyer said out loud in that crowded room that changed everything I thought I knew about the man we had just put in the ground. Stay with me until the end, because they sat me at the junior table to show me my place. And then a stranger with a leather folder stood up and called my name, and the whole room went still. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you cannot understand a card table in a break room until you understand the 4 years that led to it. My mother died when I was 6. Her name was Sarah, and I remember her the way you remember a warm room you were carried out of while you were sleeping. A voice, a particular perfume, the feeling of being the most important person in the world to someone. I have spent my whole life trying to remember her face, without the help of the photographs. And have never quite managed it. And I think that failure is the first grief of my life. The one all the others were built on top of. My father, Robert Miller, was an architect, a real one, with an office that smelled of blueprint paper and machine oil. Hands that were always a little rough and a quietness in him that I mistook for most of my life for peace. He built Miller and Associates from a one-man drafting room into a firm that designed half the commercial spaces in our county. He was good with angles and gentle with people. And those two things, it turned out, do not protect a little boy from what came next. What came next was Richard. My father hired him 4 years after my mother died. I was 10. I remember wanting so badly to be chosen by him, because I wanted so badly to have a mentor again. And boys will pour ambition into any container that is shaped remotely like the thing they lost. Richard accepted that ambition, the way you accept a coat from someone at a party politely, and only until he could set it down somewhere and forget it. Richard came with 2 partners of his own. Marcus, who was 35, and Julian, who was 32. And here is the thing I understood only much later. The thing that took me 4 years to name. From the day Richard walked into our firm, there were 2 categories of employee in it. There were his people and there was me. And the entire architecture of our family business was quietly, relentlessly organized around that single distinction. It was never loud. That is what nobody on the outside ever believed. There was no tyrannical boss screaming in an office. Richard was far too smart for that. It was done in 1,000 small allocations. Each one too minor to protest without looking insane. Marcus and Julian got the offices upstairs near the executive lounge. I was moved to the small desk near the printer in the back hall. The one that had been my father's old drafting room. Because, as Richard explained, the senior staff needed their space, and I was such an easy, adaptable young man. I was 24, and I was already learning the language that would define me. Easy, adaptable, low maintenance. Words that sound like compliments and function like a leash. When there was budget for one business trip to a client in Chicago, It went to Julian because Julian had trouble closing deals and needed the visibility. When Marcus wanted to buy a new software suite, an expensive tool, the company found the money. When I asked at 24 for a better ergonomic chair, I had my father's drafting skills. I could work from anywhere. I was told gently that things were tight right now. And did not I understand? And was not I always so good about understanding? I was always so good about understanding. I built my entire professional identity around being the one who understood, because being easy was the only currency I had found that bought me even a sliver of belonging. If I never needed anything, I could never be a burden. And if I was never a burden, maybe I could stay. That was the fear underneath all of it. The one I could not have put into words as a young man, but felt in my body every single day. The fear that I was provisional, that my father had been the thing that made me belong. And with him gone, my place in the firm was a kind of guest pass that could be revoked. If I was ever any trouble at all. My father saw some of it. I know he did because every so often he would find me in the break room, and sit on the edge of a plastic chair, and tell me I was the best designer he had ever seen, better than any blueprint. He would take me to the site visits on weekends, just the two of us, and let me sketch the facades of things, and out there in the dust, I was not the provisional employee. I was his son, his real one, his first one. Out there, I mattered. But a father who loves you on site visits on weekends and lets you be erased in the office every other day of the week, teaches you something confusing and lasting. He teaches you that respect and protection are two different things, and that you can have the first without ever once receiving the second. The thing about being the provisional employee is that the eraser does not stop when you grow up. It simply changes clothes. I want to walk you through it the way it actually happened, one piece at a time, because any single piece sounds small enough to dismiss. That is exactly how it works. It is the accumulation that breaks you, and the accumulation is designed to be deniable. When I was 26, there was a firm anniversary party. Richard arranged it, a real venue, everyone in tailored suits, taken in the good light of the downtown atrium. I remember getting dressed for it. I remember coming downstairs, and I remember Richard looking at me and saying that actually this one was going to be just his senior partners, the board, and the investors, because it was for the company's official newsletter, and it would be simpler. My father was already positioned at the podium. He looked at me, he looked at Richard, and then he looked at his notes, and he said nothing. That photograph hung in the lobby of my workplace for the next 3 years. 3 people in tailored suits. I walked under it every time I visited. My father, his boss, and his partners, framed in gold, lit like a memory of a firm I had apparently never been part of. Nobody ever mentioned it. Nobody ever had to. It said everything without a word. When I got engaged at 27 to a kind woman named Maya, Richard threw Julian a promotion party. The same year that was twice the size of my engagement dinner. When I mentioned carefully that it stung a little, I was told I was keeping score, and that keeping score was an unprofessional quality. And had not they all come to my dinner? What more did I want? What more did I want? There is a whole life inside that question. I wanted what Marcus and Julian got without ever having to ask. I wanted to be chosen once unprompted, without having to file a grievance to receive the bare minimum, and then be called ungrateful for noticing the difference. When Marcus got into trouble in his late 30s, and Marcus was always in some kind of trouble, a failed investment, a bad divorce, a tax problem, the company rallied. My father, I learned later, remortgaged part of the firm once to cover a debt of Marcus's. Marcus, who was not his son. Marcus, who called him Robert, never Dad. And who once had a board meeting, referred to Miller and Associates as the little drafting place in front of the whole room. While my father sat there, and smiled, and passed the coffee. I meanwhile asked for nothing. My lesson young. I built a quiet, decent life with Maya. I became a structural consultant, which is a job for people who like when the foundations are honest and everything adds up. And I think now that I chose it, because it was the one place in my life where fairness was guaranteed, where 2 + 2 could not be quietly reassigned to somebody more favored. And here is the part that I am least proud of, the part I need to tell you honestly. Through all of it, I kept showing up. Every holiday, every client meeting, every site visit. When my father's health began to fail, I drove the 4 hours. I brought the reports. I sat wherever they put me because I told myself that being the bigger person was a virtue. When really, if I am honest, it was the same old fear wearing a grown man's face. I was still 10 years old near the printer. Still terrified that if I ever caused any trouble, I would lose the last thread connecting me to the mother I could not remember, and the father I could not stop loving. In the last 2 years of his life, my father got sick. Pancreatic cancer, slow and then fast. And something happened in those 2 years that I did not fully understand until after he was gone. He started calling me, not the office line where Richard might answer, my cell phone in the afternoons when I later realized Richard was out. He would ask about my day. He would ask about Maya. And once, near the end in a voice gone thin, he said, "Danny, I have not been a brave man. I want you to know I always knew the difference. Even when I did not act like it, I always knew which of you was mine from the start." I thought he was just a dying man being sentimental. I told him I loved him and not to talk that way. I did not understand that he was telling me something. I did not understand that my gentle passive conflict, avoiding father had in the quiet of those last 2 years, finally decided to be brave in the only way he had left. Not out loud. Not to their faces, but on paper where it would count, where for once they could not talk over him. Or pass the coffee until the moment passed. He would sit in that hospital room with the blinds drawn. And he would sign things. Mr. Abbott would bring the documents and my father would ask me to step out for 5 minutes. 5 minutes, Danny. Go get a sandwich from the cafeteria. I always came back and found him writing with his left hand, because his right one had the IV. And he would hide the papers under the hospital blanket when I returned. And he would smile, that small, quiet smile, and ask me about my day as if nothing had happened. I thought he was being private about his medical decisions. I did not know he was signing away the future of a company he had spent 30 years building. I did not know he was writing a letter in his own hand that would one day walk into a conference room on my wedding morning and change everything. I did not know that, while I was bringing him soup and sitting by his bed and holding his hand through the worst of it, he was doing the one thing he had never done for me, while he was strong. He was protecting me. He was building a bridge out of the darkness he had left me in. And he was doing it with the last of his strength. I want you to understand something about my father. He was not a loud man. He did not raise his voice in meetings. He did not pound tables or throw tantrums or demand to be heard. He built buildings. He drew lines on paper and people followed them. He believed in the quiet power of a thing well made. A staircase that does not creak. A foundation that does not shift. A contract that does not need to be defended in court, because it is so clearly right that no one dares to challenge it. And that is what he built in those final months. Not a weapon. Not a trap. Not revenge. He built a truth so solid that it could not be argued with. A document so carefully constructed that it would stand up in any room, before any judge. In front of any room full of people who had spent 4 years pretending I did not exist. He built me a seat at the table. And he did it without saying a single word out loud. I did not know any of that yet. All I knew on the morning of my wedding was that my father was gone. And that the thread was cut, and that I had come to work to get my final paycheck, and been shown one final time, exactly where they thought I belonged. The firing itself was quiet, and it was not for me. Richard planned all of it. And he planned it as a performance of his own management. He wore a suit that had clearly been chosen with care. He received the staff at the front of the conference room seat like a CEO in a film, accepting reports with a brave, trembling dignity. While Marcus stood at his side with his hand on his back, and Julian dabbed his eyes, and the 3 of them formed a receiving line that I was not invited to stand in. I sat at the long table, not the head. The head was full. Richard, his partners, the clients, the board. I sat at the end, the dead man's only blood relative, close enough to smell Richard's cologne. And when the chairman spoke about Robert's beloved firm, he named them one by one, and he did not name me. Someone had given him the list, I can only imagine who, but it was the meeting afterward. Back at the office that finally did what 4 years had been building toward, I helped present the final project. I want you to hold on to that. My father had specified it. It was, I would learn. One of the few instructions of his that made it through. And so I was a presenter for my own father's legacy project, the only junior staff among them. And I felt the terrible weight of it on my shoulders. And I thought, this is the last thing I will ever present for you. And I was proud to do it. For one moment presenting it, I felt like his son in front of everyone. And then we got back to the conference room, and Richard put his hand on my shoulder, and he pointed to a printed email. Senior staff stays this focused on the quarterly deliverables this week. You understand? I looked past him at the long conference table. My father's table, the one he had used for every client meeting extended with both leaves. Richard's seat was at the head. Marcus and Julian and their clients filled the sides. There was, I counted, one empty chair. There was room. There was a chair. And the choice had been made to send me to the printer room instead. On the day I was fired from the only company my father had ever built, in the building where I had grown up, I sat down at the small desk. My coworker offered me a coffee, and I took it because he was young and kind, and had not yet learned which category I was in, and something happened inside me that had never happened before in 28 years. I did not get angry, I got quiet. The exact kind of quiet I had felt fall over the room. It was the quiet of a ledger finally being closed. All my life I had kept the books on this firm, telling myself the columns would balance eventually. That if I just kept giving, kept understanding, kept being easy, the respect I was owed would someday be paid. And sitting at that small desk holding a coffee cup, I finally did the math I had been avoiding my entire life. The account was never going to balance. It was never meant to. I had not been an underpaid member of the firm. I had been the firm's unpaid help, and help does not sit at the table. I decided right then that this was the last thing I would ever present. That after today, I would grieve my father privately, honestly, on my own. And I would never again drive 4 hours to be seated in a printer room. I was not angry. I was done. There is the enormous difference between those two things. And Richard, who had only ever had to manage my anger, did not yet know that I had moved past it into something he could not manipulate at all. I had made my quiet decision. I was going to pack and I was going to leave, and I was going to close the book on all of them forever. And that is the exact moment the front door opened. And a man in a gray suit stepped into the crowded conference room, with a leather folder under his arm, and asked in a voice loud enough to stop every conversation in the house whether Daniel Miller was present. The man's name was Mr. Abbott. He was my father's estate attorney, and it would turn out one of the last real friends my father had. A man Robert had known for 30 years, who had designed the drafting room in Abbott's own home, who had sat across a desk from my father in his final months, and helped a dying gentleman finally, do the one brave thing of his life. Richard rose from the head of the table with his practiced smile, and moved toward him, hand extended, already speaking. Mr. Abbott, how kind of you to come. We are just having the meeting, but if you would like to discuss the estate, perhaps next week we could. I am looking for Daniel, he said, not unkindly, but he did not take his hand, and he did not stop scanning the room, and he said my name again. Daniel Miller, Robert's son. I stood up from the small desk in the printer room. I felt every head in the house turn to follow the sound of that chair. I said, I am Danny. And Mr. Abbott's face changed when he saw where I had been sitting. He took, in the small desk, the paper cloth, the junior staff, the coffee still in my hand. He took in the long conference table with its one empty chair. I watched a man who dealt in the cold arithmetic of estates, dates same, arithmetic, in a single second. And I watched something like anger move behind his eyes, and then something like resolve. He walked across the room, and I went and stood beside Mr. Abbott. Because for the first time in my life I understood that where I stood in a room was my decision and no one else's. And I said the only true thing I had. I said, thank you for reading it out loud. He would never have gotten through it himself. And then I looked at Richard, who had gone the color of the paper tablecloth. And I did not scream, and I did not gloat. I simply said, I think the meeting is over. What happened after that took months, not minutes, because real life is administration, not fireworks. Being an executive is paperwork. And I am very good at paperwork. I went through every account and I found exactly as my father had promised. The ledger of what had been happening, the withdrawals. The loans to Marcus that were never loans. The way the firm had been quietly run at the company's expense for years. While my father was told the business was struggling, and Miller and Associates should maybe be sold. Sold. They had been trying to get my dying father to sell the one thing on earth that was his, so they could divide it before he was even gone. That was the taking he had finally seen. I did not take revenge, because I have come to believe that revenge and justice want two different things. Revenge wants them to suffer. Justice just wants the truth to finally be load-bearing. So, I did what my father put the pen in my hand to do. I kept Miller and Associates open. I kept his 11 employees, the men and women who had actually loved him in their jobs. And I gave the senior architect, who had been there 22 years, a partnership stake. Because he had been more of a son to my father than Marcus ever was. I let Richard remain in the office, as the contract allowed. And as my father, gentler than me, had wished. But the estate was administered honestly in full daylight. Every column adding up, and there were no more quiet withdrawals for anyone ever again. And I took one thing for myself, one small thing. Before I did anything else, I walked into the lobby of that firm, and I took down the portrait of the 3 people in tailored suits, and I put it in a closet. In its place, I hung a photograph I found in my father's office. In the drawer of his drafting table, where he had kept it for decades, where Richard would never look. It was a photograph of a man in an ink-stained apron, crouched down, beside a little boy of about 6, both of them holding the same small drafted blueprint. Both of them grinning at the camera, with the exact same grin. On the back in that blocky print, he had written a date and 2 words. Danny and me. Marcus and Julian I have not spoken to since. They contested the will. Of course. They lost. Of course. Because a coward who finally becomes brave, with the help of a 30-year attorney, does not leave loose ends. Richard sent me a card the following Christmas. The first piece of mail he had ever sent me in my life, and it began, "Dear Daniel, I think it is time we put the past behind us as a firm." I did not answer it. Some doors do not need to be slammed. You simply stop being the one who keeps propping them open. 3 months after that morning, after the paperwork was done, and the accounts were balanced and the employees knew they had a real boss who actually knew their names, I walked into the building my father had designed. The same building where I had been handed a termination letter on the morning of my wedding. The same building where I had sat at a card table with a coffee cup and watched my future being decided by men who had never once asked me what I wanted. I walked through the lobby. I walked past the portrait in the closet. I walked past the printer room. I walked into the conference room. The same mahogany table. The same chairs. The same city lights through the same windows. But this time I was not the junior staff. This time I was the owner. This time the name on the door was Miller. And when I sat down at the head of that table, the one my father had built, the one Richard had sat at for 4 years, like it belonged to him, I felt something I had never felt before in my life. I felt quiet. Not the quiet of humiliation. Not the quiet of being erased. The quiet of a foundation finally holding the weight it was built to carry. And I thought about my father, about the man who had loved me in silence, and then found his voice on paper, about the man who had been too afraid to say it out loud, but brave enough to write it down, about the man who had spent his last months building me a bridge out of the darkness he had left me in. And I thought about the 4 years I had spent trying to earn a seat at a table that was never meant for me. The 4 years of being easy. The 4 years of being adaptable. The 4 years of being the one who understood. I had spent 4 years trying to become someone. I was not so that they would let me stay, and it had never occurred to me that the problem was not me. The problem was the table. And the people who built it. So, here is what my father's letter taught me. 28 years too late and exactly on time. Being easy to employ is not the same as being employed. If your place in a company depends on you never needing anything, never taking up space, never being any trouble, then it was never a place at all. It was a probation. And you can spend your entire life on your best behavior, waiting to be made. And the people who put you on probation will let you wait forever, because your waiting is useful to them, and your belonging would cost them something. Where they see you is not who you are. They can put you at the printer desk. They can leave you out of the portrait, off the receiving line, out of the chairman's list. But a seat is just a piece of furniture. And the people who assign the seats are not the people who decide your worth. Sometimes the person who decides your worth is a quiet man in a drafting room who was too frightened to say it while he lived, and found his courage in a sealed envelope. And sometimes in the end, the only person left who can call you to your rightful place is you. So if you have ever been the provisional employee, the easy one, the one who was always so good about understanding, hear me, you are allowed to stop understanding. You are allowed to close the ledger. You do not have to keep buying a belonging that was never for sale. And you do not have to wait for a letter to be read aloud, to finally stand up from the desk they put you at. Stand up now. You were never the guest. You were the foundation. If this story reached you tonight, stay a moment and tell me in the comments. Have you ever been sat at the junior desk by people who should have saved you a real seat? Did you ever get to stand up? I read every single one. And if this touched something in you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, because there is a new story here every day. And the next one might sound exactly like yours.